if you buy and hold, and if you can do that for a decade or so, you're probably more than likely to make a gain. Whereas if you've had to buy and sell in a short period of time, it's much more likely to make a loss.
Kia ora, and welcome to New Zealand Property Market Podcast, brought to you by Cotality for the 17th of August 2026. I'm Head of Research, Nick Goodall, and today I'm joined, as per usual, by our Chief Economist, Kelvin Davidson. Kelvin, we have got rugby coming at our eyeballs at the moment, but before we get into all of that, because there's plenty to touch on from that perspective, you put out the latest pain and gain report last week. We did mention it last week, of course, but I think today we've got a chance to get into some of the detail within the report. So I suppose it's all yours, mate. What were the key highlights for you in the release of the pain and gain report for Q2?
Yeah, so I mean, a bit more pain, but less gain. That's been a story for a while in this soft property market. You'd anticipate that property sellers aren't doing quite as well, and it's a good market. So yeah, that's kind of the theme that's still coming through. What we look at here is simply all the properties that were resold in the second quarter of the year, and then look at the price they got versus the price the owner originally paid. So it's a gap between sale price to sale price. Pretty basic measure, but I think people really like it. They find the title catchy, and also it's real money, it's real transactions, it's how much people are actually losing, at least in gross terms, or making. So it always gets a decent amount of coverage. About 13% of properties sold for a loss in the second quarter. So yeah, that's been part of a downwards trend for a while. That number peaked or troughed, I suppose. At the peak of the market, that number was pretty much zero. So in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, it's gone from pretty much nothing selling for a loss up to about 13% now. So yeah, definitely a gradual sort of slowdown. It hasn't been a slump. We saw after the GFC that proportion of properties being sold for a loss went from about zero at the peak of the market to about 20% being sold for a loss in sort of around 2 years. So it was quite a sharp adjustment. This has gone from 0 to 13 in sort of 4 or 5 years. So it's been more of a drift rather than that sharp adjustment we saw after the GFC. And I think it could be any number of factors, but a couple of things that jump out to me as perhaps higher credit controls over time. We've got banks were not reckless back in the GFC either, but I would suspect that serviceability testing has got more stringent over time. We've got things like the LVRs, DTIs now. So it's just that sort of general environment of I guess credit checks being a standard, which has probably weeded out some of those potentially risky loans or risky house purchases before they even got going. So that might have limited some of the pain in this cycle. And also employment. I mean, we're not seeing a lot of jobs growth at the moment, and yes, there has been unemployment, but it's been more about a bigger labour supply rather than job losses. Whereas after the GFC, we did see genuine job losses. So I think those two things have probably insulated the market to some degree in this cycle. But yeah, still seeing more pain. On the flip side, though, of course, 13% being sold for a loss means 87% are still being sold for a gain of some level. So it hasn't been a slump, and still a lot of people do make gross profits. The median gain across all of those transactions where a profit was made was 280,000. So again, still pretty significant. It's down from 440, which was the number at the peak. So it has shifted a lot, but for those people who are making a gain, it's still pretty significant. Big factor there is hold period. So for those people that did make a gain in the second quarter, median hold period was 10.4 years. That's a record high versus 4.3 for losses. So pretty clear again that if you buy and hold, and if you can do that for a decade or so, you're probably more than likely to make a gain. Whereas if you've had to buy and sell in a short period of time, it's much more likely to make a loss, particularly in this cycle. Because if you think about 4.3 years, you go back, that takes you pretty much to the peak of the market. So if you've had to buy at the peak and then resell again within that last 4 or 5 years, that's been a tricky market to do that. So yeah, those are probably the key things really. There's I suppose that whole period stretching out for gains. It could be choice, people waiting for the recovery, potentially just a little bit cautious. They're just in no rush. We've seen that with our movers data from buyer classification, that people are just not moving around as much as they might ordinarily do. So there's maybe a choice factor in here. People just wanting to ride this out a little bit. maybe necessity though. It could be that deals are just taking longer. People can't get the price they want. That they want to sell, but they can't. That's so things are a bit frozen up there. So whole periods do lengthen out. So yeah, that's probably the main things. I mean, there's not huge gaps between investors versus owner occupiers. That's all sort of fairly consistent. Regionally, no surprises. Auckland and Wellington weaker in terms of resale performance versus somewhere like Christchurch. There are still loss-making sales, even in a market like Christchurch. So it's not like everywhere's totally immune to this. But yeah, those regional differences are still there and fits with what we know from property values, for example, that those Auckland and Wellington a bit weaker, Christchurch a little bit stronger. We're seeing apartments still being made for the sales being made for a loss a lot more often than, say, standalone houses. But, there's no real signs that apartments are collapsing. Yes, they're a little bit weaker, but the whole periods for those losses aren't dramatically different. So it's not as if people are really abandoning these properties, just they've bought it and go, oh, I can't stand this, 6 months later selling or anything. It's not necessarily that. But that apartment segment is just a little bit weaker in terms of values. It doesn't get as much capital growth over time anyway, so there's always going to be more chance of making a loss if you haven't built up as much capital gain over any given period of time. Always much more chance that you'll sell for a loss. So yeah, there definitely are problems in that apartment market, but I don't think it's necessarily just collapsing. And yeah, then I guess where do we go next? Well, I mean, think about lots of listings, economic uncertainty, things still being in buyers' favour. It's difficult to see this turning around very much in the next little while. It's probably going to remain a testing period for sellers, might not get gain as often, might not get as much gain, but things on the flip side being tipped more in favour of buyers. So yeah, always gets good coverage. I prepared a whole list of individual sales that journalists normally ask for about, which properties actually lost the most or made the most. Nobody's asked for it. So, if anybody's out there, I've got it. It's ready. I did a lot of work to do it. And so it's, yeah, but on this occasion, nobody asked for it. So, but yeah, it's a great report. I mean, people always get value out of it. It's a different way of looking at things. It sort of tells you the same stories as maybe our home value index, but just in a different way and with that catchy title. So
Yeah.
go check it out.
No, for sure. I mean, yeah, I'll leave a link to the report anyway. It's worth going and looking at because, yeah, it does cover essentially every TA, every city, town in the country. So worth looking at. If you didn't prepare those greatest gains or greatest lost sales, someone would have asked for it, mate. So you've pre-prepared and done the right thing. Better to have and not need than need and not have, they say. So well done on that. But I agree. Like the context there. That is so interesting, right? Like go back right to the start of what you spoke about. The fact that we've got a lower percentage loss now than we did at the sort of, peak of the global financial crisis, despite a longer period of downturn and flat. It tells you so much about the trajectory of this downturn compared to that one. So it's all that context for me. Like you can look at it and go 13% sounds really bad. Or like you said, look at apartments at 45%, that does tell you something, but the context is really important and relating it back to, the home value index or, like you say, market activity of first home buyers compared to others, the unemployment data, the fact that unemployment is higher because of lack of job growth, increased job growth as opposed to increased job losses. And we know that's happened. Job losses, just not to the extent that maybe some people expected or thought or sometimes think there is because of the headlines. So I think that's where it's really important context here. And the number that always stands out is absolutely, it's the number of years held if you sold at a loss, if you took pain. It almost always goes back to the peak of the market. It's, if you did buy at that peak and for whatever reason you're going back to market now, unfortunately, you are going to take a loss on that sale, almost every single time. And so this is just a reflection of those people that bought that now are in a position where for one reason or another, who knows why, life stage change, moving overseas, can't afford the mortgage payments, although I don't think that's a big one, that, though they are going to see a loss on paper, depending on, how they funded that, they had 20% deposit, hopefully they haven't left with less money than they went into it, or certainly not negative equity, but you never quite know. There's going to be those occasions too. But it's just, as I say, it's good context for the overall data there. I think there was some interesting differences, whether it's regionally or otherwise. I mean, some of the stats that I pulled out that I think are worth touching on, you talked about the hold period for those that made a gain, 10.4 years. For Wellington, it's 13.1 years. That's a long time. It's a long, long time that people are holding on. And again, it's a function of the market because they're going, yeah, if I need to make that next purchase to the next property, then, it's likely you're staying a little bit longer when the uncertainty is greater. And that's where I think you do get this nuance, which makes it really interesting. You need to have that view, that lens on it to understand the broader market or the broader economic environment. But to me, that's really interesting. The other one that I thought was interesting, and maybe this is just a direct reflection of the fact that Auckland has more apartments, but the fact that Auckland has a greater share of losses at 20.9%, whereas Wellington's 18.4%. Now, in most other measures, like the Home Value Index, Wellington is further down from peak. So I think typically you'd expect Wellington to be higher, but it's not. And I think it is the makeup of the property types in Auckland being more towards apartments, even more flats, shed wall houses, whatever you want to call them, properties. They're greater as well. I did look at some of the detail. I know in the report it's actually only split apartments versus other properties, so which is houses and flats together. And for Auckland, flats are up around 30%. Houses are a little bit lower. And then again, another great piece of insight from that, I think it's 15% for Auckland houses. Another great piece of information from that is, people value land. And, the standalone houses have more land, definitely have land, almost always. Whereas those flats, those, shed wall units, they sometimes have land. Maybe there's some shared land on that area where it's a townhouse or otherwise, an older property. But maybe not quite as much, but apartments certainly have no land apportioned to them. And that's where I think, as you talked about, you do see less growth in the apartment market over time because, land has generally appreciated over time, land value. And that's what is a significant core part of those houses seeing an increase in value, which apartments don't. But apartments definitely attract greater yield most often because the value of the property is lower. But your rent might still be pretty competitive compared to other properties with the similar size or similar number of bedrooms anyway. So if you've got a 3-bedroom apartment, you might get close to the similar level of rent that you would for a 3-bedroom house. Wouldn't be the exact same, but certainly in terms of comparing it to the cost you'd pay for that property, the yield would be more attractive. And so that's why it's more investors buying apartments. They get a greater yield. That's the attractiveness of that, as opposed to I'm going to get long-term capital growth out of this. But if you're still paying down your principal, you can still be creating equity at the same time, even if the capital growth rate isn't the same level. And that's why it's still attractive to many investors because that purchase price is much lower. So as I say, you can have so many streams of conversation here because of those little differences that pop up, which I just find really, really interesting. You touched on Christchurch still having 5.3% of sales at a loss, so not zero. What is close to zero was Invercargill. We know that's the market that's at a new peak now, 8% annual growth in values, but still 1.2% of properties sold at a loss. So again, there's still going to be times where people just haven't quite made it work. It's effectively flat, I suppose you'd say, on a gross level, but yeah, very, very low, and that was the lowest in the country. The other two that were under 2% were Gore and Timaru. So again, South Island, generally supporting agricultural industry. So, same old story we've sort of talked about for a while. On the other side, close to the Auckland and Wellington ones, those that have high percentages of losses around the 20% mark, were also the Waikato district, which I looked at sort of the main towns within the Waikato district, and it was Nguruawahia and Huntly. So again, pretty small places, but that's around the 20% of losses, so similar to Wellington and Auckland, which I found quite interesting. And the other one was the South Wairarapa, was also at that level too. So again, these are other markets that are small, and maybe haven't had the same levels of growth and certainly seen declines over a long period of time. So worth touching on those ones. So yeah, those are extra details that I wanted to pull out and give a bit of extra deep dive into. And yeah, otherwise, I suppose just finish on a similar thought to yours. What are we going to see in the future? Can't see it changing too much. We're not expecting value growth to come back, soon or quickly. So it's likely, in the game that's going to be going through this market in the next wee while. Again, it's going to depend on when you bought that property. If you've had it for 10 years, you should be fine. If you've had it for 5, maybe not so much. So I expect these trends to continue. You'll have similar pockets. And yeah, we're getting to some of the similar levels that we saw in the previous downturn in the global financial crisis as well. getting up around those 45, 50% for apartments and up to 13, 15, maybe 20% in some places for the broader market as well. So I expect that to continue, and it'll start to change once we see that growth come back. But that might not be, this year, into next year, and even there won't be strong growth. So the numbers won't turn around too quickly. We've seen that previously. The curve's pretty gradual, and then it'll depend longer term as to what that growth phase looks like. So we'll leave that for another time to get the old crystal ball on that one. But yeah, look, a great report. Details amazing in there, so do go check it out. And as always, send us any thoughts or feedback as well as to what you've seen or heard, and whether it backs it up or otherwise. So yeah, love that way. So well done on the release on that one. I don't know if that sparked any further thoughts, but you're welcome to jump back into pain and gain. Otherwise, the big, I suppose, my macroeconomic data I wanted to touch on this week. We haven't talked about it for a while, but as a cool factor, especially as we talk about renting just now, that's the annual net migration data. So I don't know if you want to cover off the high level of that data into the Kiwi/migrant numbers on that one, and any round off you want to do of the pain and gain report, mate. But yeah, back to you. Any extra thoughts?
Yeah, I might as well just move on to the migration figures. It's there's so many moving parts, and it's when you're audio format, you're trying to keep it relatively simple. There's just so many moving parts to these aggregate migration figures. So I'll try and keep it relatively high level. But I mean, the biggest figure is, I guess, in the people that the figure that people look at most is in the last 12 months. So it kind of smooths out a bit of volatility. We've had 17,500 net new migrants into the country. So once you take into account all of those different flows of people, different citizenships, whatever, it nets out at 17,500 over a 12-month period. So that's a 17-month high. It's up from a trough, I think, sort of 6 or 8 months ago of around about 9 or 10,000. So we are sort of creeping slowly higher, but 17,500, I think for me, the really big point is that's still a lot lower than an average. And if you look at a chart of net migration, the average probably doesn't mean that much because it's never at average. It's always way above or way below. But for what it's worth, the average is about 30, 31,000. So we're still, 12 or 13,000 people below where we'd normally. So yeah, the point for me is migrations. Yeah, it's coming back a little bit, but it's still reasonably low. Helps to explain why, say, property rents are still pretty subdued. We just don't have that same population growth that we used to have, as well as at the same time we built more houses. So, it stands to reason that rents would be a bit flatter. I guess the thing that a couple of things that people often ask about, and there's this perception that maybe for a while we were losing people. Actually, no. In net terms, that balance never actually went negative. Like I say, it troughed about 9 or 10,000. So that's one thing that people might have a little bit of a misconception about, is that we never actually lost people in net terms, but it's still running below average. Now, the thing is, there are lots of moving parts here, and what people think about when they're saying, "Oh, we're losing people," is probably just one part of it, which is the New Zealand citizens side of things. And if you look at that in the last 12 months, just focusing on the net balance of New Zealand citizens coming in minus those leaving, that is negative 37,500 in net terms over the past 12 months that we've lost for New Zealand citizens. So yep, there's still more people, more New Zealand citizens leaving that are coming in. They're heading off to Australia or the UK or whatever. There are people coming back all the time, but it's just on that New Zealand citizen side of things, more people are leaving. So that's probably what people are thinking about when they see negative flows. It's just that New Zealand citizen balance. On the flip side, 55,000 in net terms over the past 12 months of new migrants to the country. So, that's a big number. There are always people arriving. And at the moment, 37,500 net New Zealanders leaving, 55,000 net new migrants coming in. And that's how you get your overall 17,500. So, that's lots of numbers in there. There's lots of big numbers leaving, coming in, but the mix. What we're seeing at the moment is that yes, in net terms, New Zealand is still leaving, but being outweighed to some extent, not massively, but to some extent by more new migrants coming in. So there is still population growth, but it's lower than where it would normally be, and I think it is showing up in, say, for example, those subdued rental pressures, and it has wider economic implications too. We don't have perhaps the same consumer spending boost that you might ordinarily get from from migration, not the same sort of overall boost to the economy. So there is things like that, but yeah, at the same time, people might point to benefits in terms of a bit less pressure on infrastructure, a bit less pressure on say the health system, that sort of thing. So there are I suppose sort of positives as well, but yeah, hopefully that all makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I think, but the fact that it's positive, then I think the question then says, well, shouldn't that still mean net positive demand for rental property? And so you technically, depending on what's happening with supply, which we know is high and relatively strong and gone up recently too, you would still expect there to be upward pressure on prices. But I think the fact that, it is relatively expensive to rent, and the fact that not all rental demand just comes from new migrants or net migration, it also comes from household creation, and that's where it's people leaving the home. People like kids leaving the parents' place, or people that are flatting in maybe large flatting situations of 4 or 5 people going out to flat on their own as an individual or as a couple. And we know that household creation levels doesn't get tracked as frequently or as often or as well as say net migration data. It's pretty hard to get that data on a regular basis. But it's probably very likely that the household creation numbers are quite small at the moment, quite low, because it's simply so expensive. So you're more likely to stay at home longer. You're more likely to stay in larger flatting situations where maybe the per room rent or the overall cost is shared among more people, including power and food and everything else you might be sharing those flatting situations is keeping your costs relatively manageable. Whereas if you go out on your own as a couple or otherwise, then it's going to be more expensive, the total cost for your household income or your income yourself. So I suppose we've got to weigh that in there as to why we're still, even though we've got net increase in people coming to the country, and yes, we've built lots of property, and there's still a high-ish level of rental stock out there. Why is that not feeding through to rental growth? It's because household creation is also relatively low at the moment. So that's the factor missing in the overall rental conversation. But yeah, I think it's a really important one to talk about that. Yeah, we are still actually seeing positive population growth. And I do think there's been a misconception about that. But it will depend on, who they are, where they're going. Are they families? Are they individuals? Have they got jobs? That's how they feed into the labour market as well. So, yeah, there's always some interesting, conversations to be had when talking about this as well. And as you said, the fact that everyone talks about so many New Zealanders leaving, then they say, yeah, that's a failure of our economy as well, which I'm not disagreeing with, to provide, strong opportunities for those people who are New Zealand citizens to stay here, might have benefited from, our schooling or, being brought up here, of course, and everything we've put into that as a country, and then they're leaving to take their education or their knowledge away to go and work and contribute to someone else's economy elsewhere. That's obviously not great. You want that net balance, I think, of New Zealanders leaving to come down again too. And so they've got opportunity here in New Zealand, and that's also something that's spoken about quite a lot. But certainly not something we're going to get into today. But I think that's where maybe part of why the conversation leads to being a negative is because people want New Zealand citizens. If you've been brought up here and schooled here and contributing here, then stick around and contribute to the businesses here too. And we need to see more going on from from an efficiency perspective, making sure we've got a more efficient economy and much more productive economy as well. So yeah, anyway, I don't know how I've gone down that rabbit hole, but I have. But yeah, I think it certainly comes into the equation when we're talking about what's happening from a migration perspective. And yeah, good to get into that detail. But yeah, that'll pretty much do us for rounding up last week's data and housing and property market chat, Kelvin. Couple of things to look forward to, although the monthly video is actually live already, so I can leave a link to that video. Although if you're watching this through YouTube, you probably already subscribed and hit that old alert button. You should have probably seen that come up late on Friday anyway. For anyone listening to the audio, just go to YouTube, Cotality NZ channel, and you can go and find that one. This week, Kelvin, affordability report out. So this is our 6 monthly report of affordability being measured on 4 different ways. Always a good one as well. So that'll be out later this week. Anything you want to tease on that one before we sort of, I suppose, round out all the property market chat and chat some rugby, some code?
Yeah, I mean, so public on Wednesday. So, well, at this stage at least, if we can get it all sorted behind the scenes, it'll go to journalists on Tuesday for public release Wednesday. So look out for that one. Yeah, I mean, I think it'll get decent coverage. Actually, there's some really interesting stats in there where let's just say there's been a big improvement in housing affordability. Not saying it's easy, never is, but the adjustment in the past 4 or 5 years has really made a big difference, especially with interest rates having come down and incomes having gone up. Things are looking a lot better. So we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no, good one. I mean, we can go into the detail like we did for pain and gain today. We'll go into the detail of that affordability report and some of the regional differences and, the different measures as well. Because, of course, we measure it on, the standard value to income ratio, the proportion of income required to service a mortgage, proportion of income required to service rent. So the rent versus owning conversation comes up as well. And, of course, because there's typically a 20% deposit requirement, though we know most first home buyers don't use it, we do look at how long it takes to save a deposit as well, given median household income. And that data comes from Infometrics as well. So, yeah, look, it's another great report, 6 monthly. Sort of first update since the end of last year, or the start of this year for the end of last year data. But yeah, keep an eye on that one sort of mid to late this week, and we will chat about it next week, mate. But, mate, rugby chat. I don't even know where you want to start. You obviously attended the Ranfurly Shield over the weekend, the Taniwha. Smashed Taranaki. I don't know when the last time was. We kept the team to 0. We've got a challenge for the Shield this Thursday. I wish I could be there, but unfortunately are parenting alone for this week. So we'll not be able to ditch the whole family to come down for a Shield challenge. But if and when we win this, I'm going home for the parade. I'll find a way to get up there for that. And then, of course, we've got the All Blacks and this greatest rivalry tour really heating up now. First test this weekend. So, mate, how was the rugby on the weekend? What are your thoughts? How are you feeling about the Springboks? Where do we go? What do you want?
Yeah, I mean, I was down at the stadium on Saturday. Took the family, or at least some of the family. It was good. I mean, I didn't actually see a lot of the game. We were up and down the stairs and off to the kids zone and off to the food stalls and things. So I couldn't tell you a lot of the detail about the game, to be honest. But yeah, it's still fun. The kids zone was really good and yeah, decent crowd. I mean, for a just an NPC game, I know the Ranfurly Shield was on the line too, but they're still getting good crowds in there. There's still that novelty factor, I guess. So yeah, it was good, and it was raining outside, but no problem inside. So no, it was good, and yeah, I sort of like the Ranfurly Shield going round a bit. I'd prefer it to be in the smaller unions. I'd love it if it could get down to the heartland teams, Mid Canterbury, South Canterbury, these sorts of regions, and so. Northland on Thursday. I don't know. A union who hasn't had it for a long time.
In my lifetime.
Yeah,
Not in my lifetime.
There you go. I think it'd be quite cool if they could win it actually, and circulate it around. Big parade, defend it for hopefully a couple of times. So no, that'd be cool. And yeah, All Blacks. Got to say, it's taken me a while to get kind of into it, but I'm feeling into it now, and there's that old thing of, do I get up and watch the test match live? I mean, it's Ellis Park. It's just gonna be such a massive thing. I don't know. It's not as easy to get up at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. I don't even know when kickoff is, but we'll see. I just wonder if I'll cave and actually set the alarm on Saturday night. So we'll see how we go. No promises on that, but I'm feeling that sort of excitement build. So no, it's good. Heaps on, and there's still the NRL in the background too. So I'm keeping an eye on that. So yeah, good time to be a rugby/league fan for sure.
Yeah, I'd say it's heating up in the NRL too, no doubt. Yet Warriors too good on Saturday, I think it was. But so NPC, I guess Ashburton, Mid Canterbury, is it for you?
Yeah, Ashburton. Yeah, the MC Hammers, the Mid Canterbury Hammers.
Oh, yeah, the Mid Canterbury Hammers, love it.
I think they might have won it last year. I can't quite recall, but yeah, just any of those smaller unions, so getting the Shield around them would be cool. Not that it's likely to happen, but even getting to Northland or some of the the smaller tier 1 teams, particularly say Northland, who haven't had it for a long time. So yes, spread it around. For me, that's the thing about the Shield.
Yeah, no, for sure. I just wanted to clarify the fact that you could have sounded like a treacherous Cantabrian if you were actually a Canterbury supporter and grew up in Christchurch, but of course you did grow up in Mid Canterbury, hence you're not too worried about Canterbury, the big dog holding on to it. So just thought we'd clarify that point as well. But I mean, I'll talk about the All Blacks in a second, but for the NPC as well, just so good. Southland, what was that kid, like 18 years old, kicking the goal from the touchline, an absolute scenes down in Southland. Otago came back to beat Manawatu. No, that's not such a fairy tale story, but again, entertainment factors high. There were just so many games that were entertaining over the weekend, and there's always high scoring. It is such a great competition. So, yeah, and certainly glad to see the Taniwha, pretty strong this year, and maybe we can push up from our ninth position last year, just missing playoffs, to actually make the playoffs this year, and who knows, maybe even go on a bit of a run. But yes, first things first, let's take that shield. Something I've never seen us win in my lifetime, and I'm 43 years old. So that is a long time between drinks. So I can only imagine the scenes back home if we can manage to grab that one. So fingers crossed. And yeah, that'll certainly be me on Thursday night, plonk in front of the TV. But moving on to the All Blacks, I have got up for the last two 5 a.m. games. It's a nice quiet time in my household. The kids don't usually get up till 7, so I can watch the whole game in peace and quiet before the kids get up. So I've made the effort to do that, and lucky enough, just get to bed early enough that don't feel too drained from it later that day. The 3 a.m. is a different proposition, and I'm considering the old, just get up and watch it as if live. So just make sure you don't see the result. Just depends what's happening on, Sunday morning. If I've got to get out for, my daughter's football or whatever, then, you don't get a chance to watch it before you head out. So we'll see on that one. But I can't wait to see this. Like, I can't say, you can never be confident to beat South Africa. I think they clearly are. I suppose you've got to call them the best team in the world still. And I saw the TAB open with odds of the All Blacks for $2.80. So that's pretty long odds for an All Blacks game in particular. But might be worth some value because, we've certainly grown into this tour. And as long as they get all the big boys back, Roygaard, Savea's obviously coming back, maybe Jordan plays. Our first 15, and then some decent depth there as well, like Anton Segner coming off the bench. He looked great on Sunday morning. Man, I think, we've got the team. I think they seem to have addressed most of the tactics, receiving high balls, testing them on attack. It's exciting, man. I can't wait to see how it unfolds. And one of 4 tests as well. So, first test will be intriguing, but then to see how both teams evolve over this test series is going to be even more interesting. So, I'm super excited for it. I'm still in awe of Ma'anonu from last week doing that single man haka. Man, that gave me proper chills. Like the haka still gives me chills, but that was like real chills. Just an incredible dude. So, I'm fully in and can't wait for it, which might mean I'm up at 3 a.m. because you just can't beat live rugby. I might have to just take the sacrifice and hope that I can get back to sleep afterwards or something. We'll see. We'll see. Very excited, mate.
Yeah, it's similar boat. I'm 50-50 at the moment, but I suspect the alarm will be set. The odds will climb as we get closer to the time. So, how good Alice Park? That's the All Blacks have been reasonably successful there in the past from memory. I've got images of sun-filled stadiums and lots of tries and the ball flying around and the All Blacks doing pretty well. So who knows? We'll see. It could be the clash of two styles again, I suppose. So that'll we'll see how that plays out. But bring it on.
Just fingers crossed it's not decided by a referee who wants to get too involved or a TMO who gets way overly involved. So, don't want to give them mention, but, hopefully the referee is less involved and that probably plays in the All Blacks' hands. I realise that. But, hopefully just not over officious, and I think we'll enjoy the game. So, all right, mate, we better leave it there. We are not a rugby pod, but I couldn't hide my excitement for it. But, yes, we will no doubt chat about that one next Monday as well. But that'll do us for today. Thanks, as per usual, for your thoughts, Kelvin, particularly when we get into the detail of the pain and gain and providing that context. As I said, really, really useful to understand all of that. But that'll do us for today. Thank you very much for listening. Please do get in touch with any questions or feedback. Always good to hear from you. But just want to say thanks once more. My name is Nick. He's Kelvin. You've been listening to New Zealand Property Market Podcast. Mā te wā.